Hi people, thanks for coming to the channel. Welcome. If you like my content, please feel free to subscribe and share the video. This one is going to be like a lot of the videos I do. It's kind of a blend of subjects I've raised in previous videos, but I thought it would be an interesting one. I was just on a boxing forum. It's a forum I joined quite recently. It's pretty good. Some good discussions there. There's also some immature stuff. I think you're going to get in any group that has a lot of members. This one has a few thousand, so you're always going to get a mixture of member quality. Some people who want to contribute in a positive way, and some people who just want to, you know, um, who take a far more immature approach. But I noticed something interesting. This is very, very male dominated, by the way. It's like 99% of the comments I've seen have been, in fact, all of the comments up until this point were guys. And that's not overly surprising. Boxing is still a largely male dominated sport. Most boxers are men and most fans are men. But it has become a bit more, uh, that's changed in recent years, obviously, but somewhat changed. But anyway, a young woman posted a photo of her in a gym. Now, maybe it was a little bit posing, but I noticed that the reaction to this was quite, frankly, misogynistic. It was quite a bit over the top. Now, I get the contention that people were making that she was sort of that it seemed that she was posing rather than taking the sport seriously. But the point about this, as she explained, was that she wasn't claiming to be a fighter or a professional. She said it's just a hobby and she does it for exercise. And she had pictures of herself in the gym now. Yeah, she was attractive. But I don't think it necessarily followed that that was somehow disrespectful. But, the comments were bombarding her with these really, some of them were quite, just unpleasant. And I think it was unnecessary. And I do wonder if that had been a guy in the gym, would it be the same reaction? I don't know. But anyway, what I'm driving at is, people were saying that if anyone was defending her, they were being simps, SIMP, and that was kind of the genesis of what I felt would be make for an interesting video topic. That is respect for women versus being a bit naive and simping, to use this term. I don't really like the term. I never use it. But basically, in popular vernacular, the idea is a person, usually a man, who goes out of the way to defend a woman, or another person, usually a woman, usually with the cynical notion that they're looking for some sort of favor or they're going out of the way for unrequited attention. Um, that may sometimes be the case. It's very similar to this term white knighting. Again, an internet term where you get maybe a guy that's going out of his way to defend a woman or a female member of a forum. Um, I have very mixed views on this. I think sometimes it's definitely the case. And actually, such guys end up looking foolish because not only do they make themselves unpopular with other men, women would actually find it patronizing, like they can fight their own battles. But I also think that, calling out abusive women or calling out misogyny doesn't make someone a simp. Um, and I don't like to see women getting bullied for no other reason than being women. Not necessarily for any contextual thing, but simply for, being women, and I have seen it. I don't want to imply that this is really widespread. And I will say this, I think in journalism there's a whole industry around male bashing. I mean, there isn't a single day goes by when you won't see a woman writer begrudge something that men have done in some national newspaper. It's pretty much every day. So I would say that sort of writing is far, far more common than men bashing women. But we see the Andrew Tates of this world, and there is a whole industry around that. I don't think we should downplay it. Guys like that get millions of followers, often impressionable young men. And we see this disturbing phenomenon of the rise of so-called incel culture. I don't want to make this video too complex and bring in too many different subjects, but there's a lot of overlap with these things. So I want to talk a little bit more specifically about what does it mean that this concept of respect women, because it's a little bit generalizing. Half the world is women, right? Um, I think it's a little bit short-sighted to say all women automatically deserve respect. Some women don't deserve respect. If they have committed a criminal offense, I don't think they deserve any more respect than a male criminal, for example. I mean, does a woman who, for example, falsely lies about rape, does she deserve respect? Does a woman who gets involved in emotional abuse of a partner, does she deserve respect? A woman who abuses children, um, a girl gang who bullies other girls, you know? Um, I think it's a little bit naive, and this is where white knights, I think, are seen very cynically. They tend to see all women as sort of these vulnerable little girls. The truth is, some women are very assertive and tough, and not only can they handle their own, they could be at times unpleasant and obnoxious. So that's why I should stop short of saying all women automatically deserve respect. Now, as a general idea, I look at it a little bit like older people. If I'm on public transport, let me use this example. If I'm on public transport and there's an older person, particularly if they're obviously older, they've got a walking stick, maybe some other sign that they're obviously an older person, and they need a seat, I would, without question, offer to give it to them. Now, they may or may not take it. They may be fine with it. When I was in China, I done that a few times. Although in China you have to be careful because there's a lot of scams in place. There's been cases in China of young people, being polite to older people, and I'm not just talking about tourists, I'm talking about Chinese citizens as well. And they end up, the old person will fall down, and then the relatives accuse the person of pushing them, and it's a scam basically. It's very manipulative and low, and it does happen. But that's the sort of thing I would unquestionably offer them my seat, as I think any decent person should. The same applies to a pregnant woman. You know, um, People say like, "Oh, it's her choice to get pregnant," but it's not about virtue signaling. It's just about being a decent human being. Now, an able-bodied young woman, would I give up my seat? No, there's no need to, unless she is obviously tired or maybe carrying very heavy bags or something. If she's an able-bodied young woman who, isn't carrying anything heavy, I might be tired. I'm not going to give up my seat for her just because, if she's the same age as me, if she doesn't have children, she's not disabled, there's no obvious sign that she's vulnerable in that sense. So, because frankly, a lot of women, if I were, or a man was to give up a seat in that circumstance, she would take it the wrong way. She would think he's making a move on her. And I think, unfortunately, it's a bit of a cynical sign of our times that being polite is more often than not seen as, oh, he must be making a move. Now, I know that there was a time when I maybe would have been like that. I would have thought like, oh, respect women, but I started realizing that that can be misinterpreted, and society and women can misinterpret it, and it's all very well saying, well, I know what my values are, but I thought the hell with it. If I'm going to be misunderstood, then what's the point? I'm not doing it to because I want to get in bed with her. I'm doing it because I respect women. So, in some ways, there's mixed messages, and I think feminism is partly to blame for this third wave feminism. On one hand, they make this big thing about strong, independent women, and that's fine. Now, I actually think it could be a good thing because if a woman, for example, is not financially dependent on a man, that's probably good for men. On the other hand, you know, often. feminists will make this a big thing about, for example, if a man expects, or if a man says let's split the bill on the first date, or pay for our own uh, dinner or whatever, there are a lot of women who would say he's lacking chivalry. That puts her in a difficult position. So I think women have to decide they can't have it both ways. They can't, on one hand, expect men to be gentlemen and chivalrous whilst saying, I'm a strong, independent woman. You cannot, that's a contradiction. You can't have it both ways. Now, don't get me wrong. Being a strong, independent woman doesn't mean you need to be disrespected. But I don't think you can make that claim whilst expecting men to be, chivalrous. That's just, it's obviously a contradiction. Um, for me, I tend to judge situations in their own merit. I remember, again, looking at China, I did sometimes offer my seat to older people when that situation required. But I also was in a situation, I was on a long train journey, and of course, China is a huge country. The distances are vast, and there were two young women who had heavy bags, and yeah, I'm not going to lie, they were attractive, but you know what? What sort of man would I be if I'm just sitting there and they're struggling to get their bags up in the overhead compartment and just looking at them? And being a man, I'm physically stronger, so obviously I'm going to offer to help. That was with no sort of vested interest of, oh, I hope you know, get into the sack with one of them, because they were going to a different city anyway. It's like on a long journey. But to me, that's not about virtue signaling. That's just being a decent human being. And honestly, had that been a guy with a walking stick, I would have done exactly the same thing. So I think, unfortunately, it's a cynical side of the modern world that people can read too much into politeness. By the way, although there was a language barrier, those two young women, I'm guessing they were friends or sisters, they could see what I was doing, and they thanked me in Chinese, and they appreciated it, and I appreciated them appreciating it. So it was all good. Um, I've come across situations. I haven't really been in this situation myself, but I've come across situations where men have tried to step up, because this is another thing we often hear: men need to step up. You know, it's often happened in high-profile situations where women have got into trouble or there's been real tragedies. We hear this claim from feminist men need to step up. Well, that's all very well, but you need to explain, what does that mean? I recall a situation. Guy in Birmingham told me that he saw a woman being basically beaten up by her boyfriend, and he intervened. He basically told the guy to back off, and he physically intervened. Well, what happened? Did she see him as, intervening for her sake? No, she actually told him to F off and mind his own business. So this is a guy who was risking his own safety to protect the woman. Does he get thanked for it? No. It gets thrown back in his face. Now, I'm not saying all women have that attitude. They don't. But, when women call for men to step up, they have to realize that they're essentially calling for men to potentially risk their own safety for a stranger. So I think that expression needs to be a little bit um, clarified. What do they mean by that? If they mean let's condemn misogyny and let's condemn abuse of women, yeah, I'm all for that. But I think there is a little bit of contradiction in saying men need to step up, but don't patronize us. We can look after ourselves. I'm sorry, but that is just a fundamental contradiction. It's like, I mean, I remember when we've had high profile cases recently. I want to be sensitive how I talk about this, because these are real cases, and family members of the people involved. But I'm talking about Sarah Everard and other young women who've been murdered. Awful, awful situations. But very often around those cases, there was a big debate, and the police got criticised for saying that women should exercise caution. And it was like, oh, this is victim blaming. But I think there's a big difference between common sense and, saying people should exercise caution versus victim blaming. It's not the same thing at all. So, for example, in a situation like that, of course, a rapist is always to blame. Of course, an attacker is always to blame. If there is a situation where young people are being targeted, young women are being targeted, is it really victim blaming to say, well, women should exercise caution, walk with friends at night time? It's not even a case of like, oh, make sure a man is with you, but be with friends, even female friends. If a young woman, any woman, walks home at night alone, it's not her fault if something happens to her. But surely it's not victim blaming to say that's a little bit reckless. I mean, the same as if there is an area that has a high rate of burglary and someone leaves the door wide open, it's not, it's the fault of the burglar, but that is not the same as victim blaming, saying, well, exercise caution, lock your door. So, in the case of women being alone, exercise caution, be with friends. It's not even have a man to protect you, it's a case of be with friends, let people know where you are, etc. It's not a case of talking down to her or patronizing her or blaming her. It's a case of just using common sense. So I think sometimes this idea of victim blaming can be conflated with common sense advice. So I don't always defend the police, but I think they were unfairly criticized for some of that. Um, in terms of the general idea of respecting women, I mean, in my personal life, probably about half of my friends are women. Um, Broadly speaking, I've always got on well with women, but I'd be lying if I said I've always liked every woman I've come across. I've had situations where women have screwed me over, wasted my time, insulted me, and I take quite an egalitarian approach to this. I'm not going to hold back if a woman's disrespecting me or insulting me any less than I would with a man. Now, if it comes to physical altercation, and I'm not, someone that gets into physical altercations, clearly there are differences. There are. I mean, I would definitely think very, very carefully before any physical altercation with a woman. The only time I think it's justified is necessary self-defense. And I do think there's a difference with physical altercation with a man. Now, this is not to say I think street fights in general should be avoided. But if some crazy woman's running at me with a knife, I'll do anything I can to protect myself. Or another example, and this is an interesting one, if she's hurting a child, or she's hurting a more vulnerable person, i.e., another woman. And here's an interesting question. This is one for people to think about. What if you have a girl gang or a violent woman attacking a woman that you care about? I remember seeing a video where this girl gang was picking on a teenage girl and her father intervened. Now, most people, I'm pleased to say, back the father, but there will be some people saying, oh, we shouldn't have done it, they're girls. Well, I do somewhat subscribe to the view if girls are going to demand and women are going to, demand that they're treated equally and they're going to get in physical altercations and they're going to be bullied and pick on more vulnerable people, they can't whine if a man steps up and stands up for that more vulnerable person. But in a more general sense, I oppose, any sort of physical altercation unless it absolutely requires it. For the same reason, like, I'm opposed to mixed sex martial arts. I think because it's a situation where you know, the man will always be at a disadvantage. Why? Because if he wins, then he's a thug who beats women. If he loses, then he was beaten by a woman and that he's not good enough. So I think that automatically puts the guy at a disadvantage. I remember when I was training for my boxing event, a charity amateur event, it was, single sex combat in terms of the actual fight, but there was sparring involving where they mix everyone up. And I must admit, when I was sparring with the guys, I must admit, I held back when I was sparring with the women. And I remember one of them got annoyed with me. She said, no, I need this as much as you, don't hold back. So I did, um, open up a little bit more. But I was not going to hit her on the head, not hard. I just wasn't prepared to do that. People can make of that what they will. I threw punches and stuff and tried to get the basic posture, but I was not going to throw full punches at a woman. I just was not going to do that. Um, But the general issue of respecting women, I mean, I think some of it is virtue signaling. I remember, I think it was last year, Sadiq Khan, not for the first time, had this really nauseating campaign on the London Underground, talking about staring at women in a certain way. Now, I'm sorry, if you start getting legislation that is based on feelings alone, how do what if someone has social communication problems? What if they have anxiety? There's what one person may interpret as staring in a seedy way, someone else might say, actually, that person perhaps has learning difficulties or some other social awkwardness or whatever. I don't think you should legislate on that. And there's this whole list of sort of checkpoints. So, do not call women crazy. Do not. Well, I'm thinking, okay, so is it okay to call men crazy? What if a guy has been stalked by an ex-girlfriend? Should he not call her crazy? So that sort of stuff I've no respect for. I think it's just, that is definitely virtue signaling. That is definitely taking it to another level. What I would say is talking about women in a really disrespectful way, overtly sexualized, disrespectful in that sense. Yeah, that's something I've no respect for. And another thing, thinking of the world of sports, I mentioned boxing. I can never respect a fighter who, abuses women. That's why, I mean, I would acknowledge their skills in the ring, but I cannot fundamentally have a great respect for someone like Carlos Monzon, the great Argentine boxer, or Edwin Valero, the Venezuelan, Mike Tyson, convicted rapist. Those guys, they achieve big things in the ring, but I fundamentally cannot respect men who beat up women. Domestic violence is a rife problem in Latin America, for example. Um, and as for men who, brutalize women on a daily basis, if their sport team loses, I think they're the scum of the earth. I don't understand how those guys can hit a woman in the face or anywhere. Um, those sort of men I hate. That's not virtue signaling. That's just an honest instinct. I just think there's something seriously that's alien to me. And I do think there is a difference between the sexes. I think there is a fundamental difference there. So when we talk about respecting women, women are life givers. I think that's probably the origins of this. Sure, it takes two to make a human being, but I think it's because women are associated as life givers. I think that's where it comes from. And also, the average woman is physically weaker than the average man, not sexism, biology. So there's a number of factors around that. But I don't unsay anything I've said about feminism. I do think modern Western feminism is quite misandrist and hypocritical. But in some areas, I'm with the feminists. I mean, in terms of trans ideology, I think women have every right to feel somewhat threatened by the way that is going. And I will always defend biological women over trans bullies. The basic issue of respecting women, I agree with it, but I just think it's a little bit generalized to say respect all women. Respect is earned. And I wouldn't necessarily say, you know, if a woman is being obnoxious, she's a woman, so let's treat her differently. And, if a woman commits a crime, I don't think she should get more lenient sentence than a man. That's often a case that feminists ignore. They'll often talk about, for example, how women don't get justice for rape, which may be true, but the other side of that is women often get more lenient sentences than men for the same crime. I think that's wrong. Um, but I do think that common sense comes into this. A lot of women are just more feminine in their personality. Certainly, a lot of my friends are. Now, as a man, if I'm with one of my female friends and some sleazy guy comes along, um, I don't think it's patronizing to her to be defensive. And I remember, again, I'll close with one, actual experience I had when I was in China again. I was with one of a good friend, and she's definitely would be a more feminine woman. She's just she was a more feminine woman. I remember this drunk old Australian guy came along. Now, he wasn't a real threat, but he was being quite sleazy, and I was a little bit protective of her because she didn't entirely hear what he was saying. I did, and I wasn't going to like lay the guy out or anything, but I was definitely, just prepared in case something escalated. And I would have protected her if I had to. It's not about virtue signaling or trying to be a knight in shining armor. It's just, situations require that. What sort of man would I be if I were to say, oh, she can defend herself? No. I mean, it's an interesting thing because for all the talk about strong, independent women, if you have a group dynamic where let's say you have 10 people, 9 men and 1 woman, and you have some sort of external threat, I guarantee you the men in that group dynamic will be protective of the woman. I think it's a primeval mindset. I think it goes back throughout human history. Men have always protected women, and this is another thing feminists overlook. They say women have always been oppressed. There's certainly been oppression of women. I'm not downplaying that. Women haven't enjoyed the same rights in areas like voting. I'm not downplaying that either. But it is also true that men have risked their lives and sometimes paid with their lives for protecting women. That's just reality. So this is not a black and white subject. Broadly speaking, I like women. I get on well with women. I always have. But I don't think it's a black and white subject. And hopefully some of the things I've said, it's just something for people to think about. I don't think modern Western feminism today is an egalitarian movement. I think it ceased to be that a long time ago. But I am with them when it comes to the trans issue because I think, you know, for women to be bullied simply for saying that biology matters is absurd. Anyway, let me know your thoughts.